Hello everyone, thank you for joining today's webinar. A couple of things before we get started. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available to all attendees. If you have any questions, please do type them into the Q&A window on your screen and we'll address those at the end of the presentation. So the topic of today's webinar is BlackHat, a higher education and network security. On the call with us, we have Heather Williams, Global Field Enablement at Ruckus. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Heather to get started.
Thank you, Pooja, and thanks, guys, for joining us this morning for this presentation. I am Heather Williams. I go professionally by my nickname Mo. I'm a Wi-Fi engineer at Ruckus, where I have worn a few hats over the last 7 years. Currently, I'm on the engineering side on the Global Field Enablement team. I first got at least partially involved with the BlackHat USA event in 2015, but since this year, 2017, I head the Ruckus team that provides the network for all 3 of the global events. Normally, I've spoken to about this event or about BlackHat a couple of times at different conferences and WebExes, but I've tailored this presentation for you guys in the higher ed field. So I'm hoping that there'll be a few things that'll be of interest to you. Normally, I'm giving this presentation from my home office, where I have a pretty cool setup with multiple monitors, so I could follow along if you have Q&A on the fly. I can't see that window right now while I'm in presentation mode, but we will look back at the Q&A at the end, and I'll be happy to address any of the questions that you guys have. So first of all, let's talk about the...
Heather, sorry to interrupt. Are you sharing your screen? We can't see anything.
What are you looking at?
I just see the event info.
Oh, you know what? I wonder if that kicked it out when we went from, my apologies, when we went from practice mode. I had a feeling that would happen.
Okay.
There we go.
All right, cool.
All right. Excellent. Okay, so this was just that introduction of myself is the only thing you missed with that slide. So let's talk about the what, who, and why of BlackHat. What is it? And it's pretty easy to say it's a hackers conference. I'm guilty of it, certainly, especially I live in a rural area now, and my nosy neighbors sometimes want to know where I'm headed off to in the world, and I like to keep them on their toes and maybe a little bit afraid of me. But the reality is it's an InfoSec conference, so it's IT security. And in fact, there's 3 separate events globally every year. So BlackHat Asia takes place in Singapore in March every year, because of course you want to be in Singapore during monsoon season. It's the smaller of the 3 conferences, and it turns into basically a shakedown cruise of any new network and security features that we want to roll out at the BlackHat USA event. Also, the attendees tend to be a lot more civilized compared to the wild, wild west that the Vegas event is. And that one takes place every year in July and August because, of course, you want to be in Vegas in July or August. And then the last event of the year is actually coming up in a couple of weeks. The BlackHat EMEA event is in London in December, which it finishes out the hat trick of picking the best locations at the best time of year. So any of you guys who have a strong desire to see London in winter, come on out at the beginning of the month. So because it's 2 conferences in one, like a lot of conferences, the first 4 days or 2 days, depending on which region you're in, are the training sessions, and then it's followed up by 2 days of briefings, seminars, and then the business hall. So for those of you who were network engineers on the call, you understand that designing this network gets tricky because you're in the same physical geography. For the U.S. event, we're in the Mandalay Bay Convention Center, and we occupy 3 floors. So not only is it a large conference, physically demanding, but the first 4 days are the training classes, which has far fewer people in attendance than later on for the briefings, but much higher throughput needs, and we'll talk a little bit about that coming up. The same area is occupied later for the briefings, which has a much higher density in people. So we go from about 2,000, 2,500 people during the training sessions to this year we hit almost 18,000 people during the briefing sessions. But even though we have much higher density, the actual throughput demands end up dropping. So that's the what. Who's the who? And we have the cliche of the young and evil people, the Mr. Robots, or just the twisted evil children that attend. And I've made this joke in the past. The reality is actually a lot more interesting. It's a very international group at all of the events. And at the BlackHat USA event, there are more than 100 countries that are represented. There are obviously still not enough women in attendance. But then the briefings attendance reaches, like I said, this year. In 2015, I think we hit somewhere between 10 and 12,000 people, and attendance has jumped every year at pretty much a logarithmic scale. So this year we hit at almost 18,000. The people that are in attendance are the CIOs, the CTOs, the sysadmins, the InfoSec professionals from the bottom of the rung to the top across all sectors. In addition to that, there are more than 300 media people and associations. So it's a very well-covered event. So why would you go to BlackHat or another kind of InfoSec conference? In the last year, the mainstream IT person, if not the mainstream person, has become familiar with a lot of the terms that you see on the screen. With WannaCry, which happened in May of this year, and then Petya or not Petya, depending on what you want to call it, this June, we had to come to terms with some pretty scary things. Nation-state sponsored, not ransomware, but actually a new term, wiperware. So the June wiper attack that happened this year, just before BlackHat, it was obviously clearly aimed at the Ukraine, and you can assume what you want about who would benefit from that. But in half a day, it took out their newspapers, banking, government ministries, their major shopping outlets, and their power grid, which means that for a time, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant went offline. Just before this attack began, early in the morning, the head of the Ukrainian intelligence was assassinated by a car bomb as well. So while the Ukraine was clearly the intended target and was very effectively targeted, but like a biological attack, these really can't be contained, and this wiperware attack spread. And in less than a day, it really affected, there's a shipping company that's responsible for 75% of the transatlantic goods. It greatly affected them. A subsidiary of FedEx was affected. Construction companies across Europe, Chinese shippers, some global software companies. And additionally, it took Merck Pharmaceuticals offline. And in July, after they had done an assessment, they reported that they would be unable to develop any new hepatitis B vaccine until 2018, directly related to this wiperware attack. But not to worry, because they had a stockpile. Unfortunately, just last month, they announced that there is now a shortage. So the reality is that there is none of our key verticals that can afford to be complacent about security, which is why 18,000 CIOs, CTOs, sysadmins, and InfoSec professionals attend events like BlackHat. And not by mistake, at the top of this list is higher ed. So not unlike other large businesses, higher ed has some familiar concerns, and I'm not telling that none of this is going to be news to any of you guys. You have to deal with phishing exploits, dealing with user education, especially with the device management, with all of the BYOD that happens, the government's over data security, and then just all of the unsecure personal devices that you guys have to manage. So, however, unlike, as opposed to like a regular business entity, universities and colleges are actually sort of a high priority target, and there's a couple of reasons for this. The first two bullets allude to the fact that there's at least a perception that you guys make an easier target and that you may be harder to secure just because of the decentralized nature of many of the IT departments in higher ed. Also, at bullets 3 and 4, you can see there is a lot to be gained. You're a high-value target. There is a lot of information to be mined. There's a lot of intellectual property and valuable research to be gained. And for better or worse, you guys also many times have incredibly fast networks, which leads to all of those bullets also lead to the sideways attack, which is known as a lateral attack. So as opposed to like a simple smash and grab attack, a lateral attack is strategic and targeted. So your IT team may on a regular basis be inundated with normal security events like I listed on the previous slide. And it's really easy to spend all your cycles chasing down policy violations, investigating anomalies, or analyzing some flag executable that may just end up being adware. But the presence of a lateral movement really needs your attention, because it's a clear indicator that there's a threat that's attempting to extend its reach into your network or into associated networks, so any businesses or sister colleges that you team with for research and things like that. In most of these cases, attackers move from device to device, and instead of having to gain access privileges on each individual, they're able to get spread across. Think of it as moving like a knight on a chessboard. So they get to dig deeper, and it also gives them additional points of control in case they have any one device that gets hardened against the attack. They're still able to be out there and continue the perpetuation of the attack. So these are some of the challenges that you guys face. So that's the who, what, why of BlackHat and other InfoSec securities. But I did want to show you a little bit about what the BlackHat NOC is like, which is literally surrounded by plexiglass. We build it out in a large conference room, and then we allow attendees to come in, see us work. If they have any questions, they can knock on the glass, and any of us are happy to come and answer those questions. The BlackHat network is strictly best in class. There is no such thing as pay for play, and the NOC team is headed by some of the best InfoSec network professionals in the world. And so north to south in the network, we use CenturyLink, which up until this last year, including this last year, it was 2 1 gig load balanced pipes out to the network. I'll talk a little bit more about why going forward that's going to change. The Palo Alto provides the firewall, and RSA WatchGuard does the monitoring, and then Gigamon provided the taps this year. We also had some WIDS services sort of on the side that was provided by Pony Express, and that gave us some interesting insights as well. But everything south of that is Ruckus. So we are the network provider from the wired and the wireless side. And because everything north of that is what's providing the security, but that doesn't matter if your wired and your wireless side aren't stable. So the ICX switches that we used this year, well, no, since we began using those, one of the things that we use with that is port security. So this allows for us to, and this is not the kind of thing that you would see in a normal event. I think BlackHat may be unique with where this is a thing that you actively have to worry about it. But what we saw last year was a fairly high number of hijacking attempts. And so since they know that the physical port that access point that's, and these access points are scattered all over the convention center, they're plugged into something that's going to take them someplace pretty nice, i.e. back to the NOC. They'll try to pull the port and hijack that port, and what we do with port security is we just air gap that port so it goes down as soon as it's unplugged. I am happy to report that this year we had far fewer hijacking attempts, and as the Wi-Fi engineer, that made me very happy, just because every time one of those ports went down, I physically had to run out to the access point, put my eyes on it, and make sure there wasn't someone plugged into that port before I could have the port bounced. And since they never chose an access point that was anywhere near the NOC, you can understand that I was walking last year sometimes 20 miles a day just covering those 3 floors on the convention center. So we had these ICX switches because we're on 3 of the floors of the convention center. We're in 30 IDF, so the intermediate distribution frame. These are the wiring closets that are scattered throughout the convention center on all 3 floors, and then the MDF where we aggregated all of the data. So all of those went through Ruckus ICX switches, and then we had the Smart Zone, which was the controller that I used. I have used a virtual smart zone in the past. I have a standardized kit that I have built out now, so I have the physical smart zones that I carry with me now when I do conferences. I would love to be able to use a remote virtual controller, but for BlackHat, we can't do that because we're not going to open up any ports coming in for obvious reasons. In addition to the controllers, which by the way I ran in a 2-node cluster, so it was an active-active with load balancing the APs that I had across both of those controllers. The secret sauce for how we protect our network, we have a partner called RGNets. In addition to some of the other services that they can provide us, they are giving us a almost per device VLANing, and this is something that we've been able to use not just at every BlackHat, and it has kept us unhacked. Please do not repeat that. I don't need a target on my back any more than I do. But we've also used it across higher ed campuses across the U.S. for student housing out into the classroom. So every device that student A has can connect to the resources on campus that he needs to see, but then he also can connect to still the printer that he has back in his dorm. And so this is something that has been, made us really very successful. The 120 access points that I deployed this year, I used a combination of R600s and 700s that I've had in my kit for the last couple of years. I am, since this is my presentation, and since I'm talking about BlackHat, I guess it's only appropriate that I go ahead and do this. I'm going to hijack my presentation for just a second to tell you that I am very happy to tell you that those 120 access points today are being managed by a virtual controller in California, and they are providing Wi-Fi in FEMA distribution and evacuee centers across Southeast Texas, Florida, and Puerto Rico. And this is part of Ruckus's work with an organization called Information Technology Disaster Resource Center, or itdrc.org. I'm going to pause for just a second and repeat that so that you can make a note. itdrc.org, Igloo, Tango, Delta, Romeo, Charlie.org. This is a fantastic group. If you want to know more about them, please Google them. Feel free to email me, heather.williams@ruckuswireless.com, or you can hit me up on Twitter at NoBetterWiFi. I have a caveat about my Twitter account. That's a personal account, and my activities there do not represent Ruckus. But ITDRC is a way to make nerds into superheroes after disasters, and I'd be glad to tell you more about that. But so my kit got sort of taken apart and is doing some very good deeds right now across the U.S. So the BlackHat SLA in the past, so starting in 2015, this is what they asked me for. And again, I was providing Wi-Fi only for in the common areas for the attendees and during the briefings. So really, all they wanted was, first, don't get hacked. That would be nice. We'd like that very much, please. Thank you. But as far as the Wi-Fi, they said, well, you know, we told the attendees there'd be Wi-Fi. It'd be nice if we gave them some Wi-Fi. Other than that, we really don't care. I mean, like, you can give them as much or as little. It can work as well or as not well. If we get 0 complaints, we're going to consider that to be awesome. So it wasn't a huge ask in terms of performance. In terms of deploying, it was a little bit challenging just because it was a rolling deployment. So the first 4 days, I needed to have the network up just in the hallways, and I needed to add all of the extra access points for the briefing sections halfway through. So it's basically you're running a sprint but at a marathon pace. And so then I needed ubiquitous coverage for the last 2 days. And we used a PSK, which is an oxymoron for a, you would think, for a, to use a pre-shared key for a security conference. And we had just this one common SSID. So, you know, this is essentially no security at all. This is where layer 8 gets involved, however, because there are some, with the tinfoil hat attendees and the nature of how queasy they are about doing anything like installing a certificate or installing anything on any of their devices. We couldn't exactly go with an open SSID because that's equally laughable, but the PSK really wasn't much of an improvement. So what happened starting this year was during our first planning session, I heard the quote that no Wi-Fi engineer really ever wants to hear. We don't need wires. Our wireless works great. No Wi-Fi engineer is going to tell you that Wi-Fi works better or even as well as the wire. We're never going to get to that. But this year, for the first time, almost all of the traffic ran across the wireless, even in the training sessions. The only wired networks that we provided were at the registration areas, and then also a couple of the training sessions that physically could not make use of the wireless, like the SCADA classes and things like that. So because the training classes, which are some of the most sought after classes, most of them sell out pretty quickly, they're also fairly expensive. So because these were relying on the wireless, our network, our SLA was now 5x5, 5 nines, and it had to be up and running from before the first day. The nice thing is that because we owned the network from the MDF to the access point, and being a control freak helps, we were able to roll this out a lot easier than it had been in the past. And that last bullet, I want to point out, RGNets, there's nobody well, there's no Wi-Fi engineer who thinks that captive portals are a good time, and certainly any of you guys who spend any time in a hotel can bemoan the fact that captive portals, depending on what device you have, what OS that it's running, what version of browser you've got, you know, captive portals can be the bane of your existence or just a complete nightmare. Because the RGNet is in the data stream, the captive portals they just stink and work. And the really nice thing about that is that what that allowed us to do is VLAN each of the classrooms separately. We needed to have everybody in each training class on the same VLAN because they needed to share resources. But outside of training, we wanted them to then be able to have the per-device VLANing. And RGNets was able to do that using a captive portal with passphrase, and they were even actually able to do .1x security and encryption across the air using that, and without having to install a certificate of any kind. So that was really nice. The wireless challenges, again, because this is BlackHat, it's not just the usual suspects. You've got some really ugly numbers up here in terms of what we were seeing. Including this year, we always have, you know, the rogue SSIDs. We have thousands of rogue SSIDs that will pop up. And at BlackHat USA, many of those SSID names are not safe for work. They do tend to have a little bit of fun with that. But this year, we actually saw 10 of them on drones, which of course is a lot of fun. This picture is this guy not only took a generic Wi-Fi, and this is just a monitoring device, just broadcasting a SSID, but he actually took the trouble to build print out a 3D, do a 3D printing of the battery case, and then connect this and scatter these in potted plants. So now you know why everybody at BlackHat wears tinfoil hats. But one of the things that's missing from this list is the things that you would expect you would see. I have never seen my SSIDs being spoofed. I've never seen DOSing attacks on the wireless side. There was one DOS, what we thought was a DOS attack that was suspected, that was in it was in the executive area, which turned out to be a user error problem rather than an actual attack. And then, of course, we've got the Wi-Fi cactus. So forget the 17 pineapples that we saw in the air. This guy has more than 50 that he has stitched together. This is custom software and a lot of hardware that's on a carry backpack. So this guy has no problem tracking any roaming events since he can monitor all of the channels at the same time. So that'll tell you something about the personalities of the people who attend a lot of times. This sort of eye chart just gives you an idea of what we were able to see through the RGNets monitor. The blue is the emerging threats, and that's interesting. And by the way, these the days that are listed here, so the first 2 days with the majority of the blue, these are the first 2 days of trainings, then the second 2 days of trainings, and then the trainings are over with, and the last 2 days here are just the briefing sessions. And so you can see that a lot of the threats drop down after that. But the blue is what's more interesting because those are emerging threats. These are domains that have never been seen. They were probably created specifically for the training classes, and so because the training classes, they're supposed to be, doing things that under normal circumstances would be highly suspicious, but we do like to track that. The red is malware, and these detections were really important because it allowed us to go on a seek and destroy / get them off the network mission before anyone else could get hurt. And big kudos to RGNet for this because of their network segmentation abilities. We were able to silo people who had malware on their devices and protect the rest of the network. This is just a pretty picture of, this is a piece of software called OIP. This gives us a picture of attacks that are coming. Most of these attacks are coming from the IP address space of the Wi-Fi clients, and they're aimed at my gateway. The relative size of the packets is indicated by the blobs. The green are TCP packets, the red is UDP, and the white is ICMP, so we actually did have a couple of ping attacks. And I included that, and this one is a much not as good a picture that I just took with my iPhone a while ago, but the video you can see in real time, and you can't see the IP addresses, but if you could, you would see that they're coming from the Wi-Fi client space, and most of them are aimed right at the gateways, trying to get into the NOC side network. So that's just sort of a nice picture to show you some of those things that we can see. So some of the sexy stats, because security doesn't matter if you're wired and your wireless isn't stable. We had 100% uptime, and we got up hours ahead of time, which has happened in the history of BlackHat never. So this was really a good conference for us, and it allowed a lot of people to get a lot more sleep than we normally get. We pushed through 2 terabytes of data each day during the trainings, and most of those spikes were in the morning as people were coming in and downloading VMs, a lot of times across a constrained VPN network or VPN tunnel that was going to someplace not in the U.S. The worst ones were the ones going into Australia because the backhaul out of Australia is still a little constrained. But because of this, remember I told you earlier that we have the backhaul is 2 1-gig pipes. We actually twice in the course of the event actually hit a L wall with we exceeded our backhaul capacity, and that's what caused some network problems. So starting next year, they have determined that they're going to a 10 gig pipe, which should give us plenty of bandwidth. During the briefings, we had a throughput spike at lunchtime, and even though we had only almost 18,000 attendees, the throughput requirements were much less. So I threw this is just a graphic of the second floor, which is probably about 50% of the geography that we covered. We're also on the 3rd floor and the 1st floor, but those are smaller areas. So for the network designers, I just wanted to show you that the red areas here is where the trainings took place, and so that's where our 2 terabytes was being pushed through, but it's spread over a fairly large number of access points. The briefings, everybody got on and did their chat sessions and tweets and everything during lunchtime, and those were going out across probably 8 to 12 access points total, because these meal areas are, there's no attenuation out there at all. These are just wide open spaces. So the highest number of simultaneous connections that I had on a per AP basis was probably about 250 during the meals, and I didn't have a problem with that at all. Well, last year, because of some other technical challenges, unrelated and not to anyone in particular to be blamed for it, we had maybe 350 clients on an AP at a time. Again, we didn't have any particular problems with it. It's just not something that you would normally design for if you can help that. And then finally, wireless is only as good as the wired network. So I'm the Wi-Fi engineer on the team, but my steely-eyed network men are switch SEs at Ruckus. 2 of them are with professional services, and 1 is the local SE who just happens to be unfortunate enough to live in Vegas, and I couldn't do anything without them, and I am profoundly grateful to them at all times. And I'm going to finish up with my gratuitous puppy picture. These are my lake puppies, and they like to have their nose into everything. So with that, I have finished quite a bit earlier than I usually do. I don't know if I just had too much coffee today and spoke fast, but it will allow me to hop back over to the, I'm going to quit sharing so that I can go back and see if we have any questions and answers, or questions. I guess I'm going to have to provide the answers.
Thank you, Heather. So a quick reminder to everyone on the call, please enter your questions into the Q&A window. So Heather, to kick it off, there was one question that came in, which was, how would you go about securing IoT?
Oh, that's a really good question. And anything that got on our network, so now if you're talking about that BlackHat or just in general? And I guess I'll answer it both ways since we're not going to get clarification probably in time. But at BlackHat, everything went through our network with our GNets, and so we were able to do a per-device VLANing. Now, obviously, at 4,000 some odd VLANs and 18,000 attendees, that's not entirely true, but our GNets has some patented technology that allows them to round robin and give basically a virtual VLAN. So it allows us to reuse VLAN numbers but still maintain the segmentation. In general, IoT is certainly right now we have more concerns about it than I think have been in the past. We saw the bot attack last year with a distributed denial of service attack that was able to use some IoT vulnerabilities. And then, of course, the latest, I referred to this as the panic trolls, but the crack attack, which, by the way, was spoken about it was the one briefing that I got to attend. What is interesting from an academic point of view, that IoT devices are going to be the hardest to secure just because they don't always get upgraded. So I would say absolutely use the WPA2, which is not broken despite what some of the crack trolls wanted you to know about. Use the standards are not broken, and use as much of that as you can.
Great.
I hope that answered the question.
It did. I think if there are any other clarifications, they can type into the Q&A window. Here's another one from Glenn. If you do this again next year, what changes would you make?
Oh, that's a good question. And so here's the thing that you guys need to understand. I'm the Wi-Fi engineer. I am not an InfoSec professional at all. I let the appropriate layers of people. I married up the OSI layer, so my husband is my server guy. I know a little bit about InfoSec just because it's interesting and because I've been hanging around with these guys so long, I've sort of become a junkie. So when it comes to what I'm going to do next year, it includes, obviously I've given away all of my R600s and R700s, and those are the 3x3 and 4x4 Wave 1 11 AC access points. So my boss has promised me some new toys next year. So I'll be carrying our Wave 2 access points along with. We do have some things that are sort of in the pipeline that I can't talk about. But one of the things that I can tell you about is that we'll be using an on-prem SCI in order to be able to. That's our smart cell I should know the name of it. It's our big data analytics software, and we're going to be using that to not intrude on anyone's privacy because we scrub everything after we leave BlackHat, but just to get some interesting graphics and also information on usage. So we are going to be able to use that next year. And there's some other things, but security-wise, I let the other guys mostly make the call for that. We did do some tests this year, and we're able to use .1x for the NOC team, and this allowed us to have through Wi-Fi access to our NOC devices across the network, and that was secured through our GNet, something that you wouldn't think you would want to have at a place with a big target on it like BlackHat, but we were able to do that.
Great.
And again, if I answer any question incompletely or you're dissatisfied with it, hit me up. Again, my email is heather.williams@ruckuswireless.com, because I can certainly, I probably won't know the answer if it's an InfoSec specific, but I can certainly point you in the right direction. Okay, sorry, go ahead, Pooja.
That's okay. Here's another question from Mike. What are your suggestions to start implementing security audits?
So we'll go back to I'm not an InfoSec person, and actually, ironically, my husband would know how to answer that question a lot better than I do, and since he's not, I'm in a hotel far away from East Texas, I can't reach over and get him to answer that. I do know enough to know that you really do need to do them. But as you, in terms of implementing them and how you go about that, I would have to defer that to somebody. I can tell you how to design your Wi-Fi network, but I would not want to overstate my knowledge when it comes to the InfoSec side. But you know what, Mike, hit me up on my email, so I've got your email address, and I will find you the right person to answer that question.
Okay, I don't see any more questions coming in. We could probably stay on for a couple more minutes. So if there are any final few questions, just pop them into the chat or Q&A window.
And the other thing I'd ask for is if we do a presentation like this next year, what kinds of things would you like to see covered? And if you want someone like an InfoSec person to be co-presenter, and I didn't get too deeply into the how you do the design side on the Wi-Fi, because I was trying to aim this more for the higher ed and not just to Wi-Fi engineers. But if there's anything that you would have liked to have seen covered, let me know.
Okay, Heather, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and hope you have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.